Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about the electric blue gecko, Lygodactylus williamsi. They are by far my favorite species of gecko and the species of reptile that really launched me into breeding on a larger scale. Most of the enclosures that you see behind me are my breeding pairs or trios of this beautiful little gecko. They really live up to their name, the males anyway, and most people when they see them for the first time they think, is that even real? Today I'm going to walk you through everything that I do to take care of them. We're not going to talk about breeding today. I'm going to save that for a future video, otherwise we'd be here all day. But today I am going to share with you everything that I do, all the things that I've learned over the many years that I've worked with this species in producing hundreds of these beautiful little geckos. So thanks for joining me today. Let's get started.
I'm Frank Payne, biology teacher, reptile breeder, and former zookeeper. I'm here to share with you my passion and experience working with these beautiful and fascinating animals. Welcome to Living Art.
Okay, so today, like I said, we are going to be talking all about the care of the beautiful Lygodactylus williamsi or electric blue gecko. Now, unfortunately, you're going to be seeing a lot of my face and not so much of the animal today because they are a very small and fast species of gecko. I'm not going to be holding any in my hand. I'm going to do my best to weave in as much footage that I've taken of my own animals over my voice so you don't have to stare at me the entire time, so you actually get to see what you came here for, these beautiful little geckos. Like I said, this is my favorite species of gecko, but they are not for everybody. They are a little bit more demanding than some of the easier species of lizard like leopard geckos or crested geckos or blue-tongued skinks. They do have a little bit more demanding requirements. However, when you do give them those requirements, they are a very hardy and long-lived species of gecko, easily living 10 years or more. Another thing that makes them not for everybody is the fact that they are quite small and very delicate and extremely fast. This is not a species of gecko. This is not a species of reptile that you are going to hold. All right, like I said, you're not going to see any of me holding these animals. You'll see a lot of video of them. You'll see my enclosures, but they just aren't to be held. All right, they are small. They're delicate. Their tails can fall off. They are strictly a look but don't touch species. So if that's not for you, then there's definitely other things that you should look at to have as a pet. But if you are looking for an absolutely stunning and striking reptile that will do very well in a beautifully planted naturalistic display, then this is by far the best species of gecko that you can have, in my opinion anyway. Lygodactylus williamsi is extremely sexually dimorphic. Now what that means is that the males and the females look very, very different from each other. The males live up to their name. They are a beautiful bright blue lizard. They really stand out. You can see them from across the room. The females are not as stunning, but they are still attractive. Usually they have shades of green. It could be kind of just a solid green or kind of a copperish brownish green, or if you're lucky, a very strong aqua as well. They might have a little bit of blue mixed in. Some females are almost as blue as males, although they are pretty rare. Now, as different as the adults are in terms of coloration, it might surprise you to know that sexing these animals, determining what gender they are, is actually one of the most challenging aspects of their care, because they do have fairly strong color changing ability like many other species of gecko and lizard. So only the dominant adult males are that bright blue color. Subdominant or immature males will look just like females, that kind of nice, pleasant, subdued green coloration. If you raise two males together from birth, in this same clutch or whatever, in the same enclosure, eventually only one of them is going to turn bright blue. The other one is going to stay more greenish in color. That bright blue signals that it's the dominant male. Now if you then separate them and put them into separate enclosures, now they will then turn bright blue. And sometimes you'll have a female, like I said, that's very blue herself, so it can be actually quite confusing based on coloration. Really the only way that you can know for certain is if you have a bright blue animal that's cobalt blue, that's a male. If you have one that's laying eggs, well, that's a female. All right, but other than that, there is no perfect method for determining their sex. Even looking at their ventral side, looking for hemipenal bulges in males or pores. Now, I used to use looking for preanal pores, which form as a little V. I'll try and show you a picture in this video. You look for these little V of pores just above the cloaca of the animal. Males have much stronger, more pronounced pores. Females, not so much. But however, I have seen enough times where I'll look at an animal that's pretty much full grown, look at it underneath and be like, well, that's a female. All right, there's no pores, there's no hemipenal bulges, that's not a male. 2 weeks later, it turns bright blue. It does happen. So I no longer use that as a sexing method. I wait. Really, you kind of just have to be a little patient. If it's bright blue, it's a male. If it starts laying eggs, it's a female. Because now 2 males, if you keep them together, they will often fight. But I have also had ones, especially those that have been raised together, they don't really fight too much. They have a pecking order established, and the dominant male is the boss, and the subdominant male kind of gives him room. But typically 2 males will fight, and they will fight to the death. You absolutely cannot keep 2 males together. You can definitely keep a male and a female together, and in fact, the females kind of wear the pants. They're the bosses in the relationship. They kind of push the male around. They tell him when they want to mate. They tell him when they want to eat, and he will give them space in most cases. I have seen a few very, very hyper-aggressive males that you just can't keep a female with. They're just mean, aggressive animals, but 99 times out of 100, that's not the case. You can keep a pair together, no problem. I have also started experimenting with keeping 2 females and a male together, especially if those females were raised together from a young age. They do tend to get along pretty well. In the wild, they live on a large, basically a palm tree, a pandanus palm, or screw pine it's called. And typically what you would see in the wild is you would have a dominant bright blue male, multiple females, a couple subdominant males, and their offspring all in the same tree, but kind of spread out. Since we are, of course, in practically all cases, keeping them in much smaller environments than an entire tree, I don't really try and duplicate that in captivity because there's just this much smaller space. And unless you are providing something that's many feet across and many feet tall, I would recommend just keeping 1 male and 1 or 2 females together. All right, now we're going to take a look actually how I keep them. I'm going to show you what their terrariums look like, how I set them up on the inside, and also talk about their lighting requirements, their heating requirements, and feeding and water requirements as well. Here you can see a bunch of my electric blue gecko enclosures. I love these things. They are not quite as attractive as you could possibly make. So if you get like a really nice large glass terrarium and make a nice background in it and fully plant it up with many different species of plants, you could definitely make something nicer than what you see here. But this works really, really well in terms of breeding and ease. All right, these are super simple. So definitely not as attractive as they could be made. If you're just keeping a couple of them, or even just 1 male, I'd say go all out. Get yourself a nice terrarium that you can plant up, make a beautiful background, tons of different plants. But this works really, really well and is super simple to breed and to maintain these geckos. These terrariums that you see here are PVC enclosures, which I buy from PM Herps, from Paul Mitchell. He's a distributor for, I think it's bars cages here on the East Coast. I absolutely love these enclosures for williamsi because of the fact that, for multiple reasons really. Well, this PVC that they're made of, if you hit it against something, it's not going to shatter like glass would. It's very easy to drill. If you look up there, I have a misting nozzle drilled through the top of it. Very simple to do without cracking it. A lot easier than drilling glass. The main reason why I like it for this species of gecko is that there are no crevices, there's no cracks, there's no gaps that these animals can get into to escape, to hide, or to lay their eggs in a difficult position. These things are seamless, so there's really nowhere they can go. Another really great thing about these enclosures is this right here, this lip. There's about an inch and a half of a lip there. So if a gecko gets startled and darts towards the front of the enclosure, which will sometimes happen, not often, then they hit that lip and they turn, and then they won't escape. So it makes that a lot easier. But you can see that I'm in this enclosure. They're not darting out, they're not leaving the enclosure. They do sometimes get startled, but usually, especially once they get used to you, they're not major escape risks. So let's look at what's going on inside this enclosure. The bottom has soil in it, like an ABG, Atlanta Botanical Garden style mix. I don't use their exact recipe, but I kind of just use a cheap knockoff version, which is definitely not as good as ABG mixture, but these enclosures are not kept nearly as wet as, say, a dart frog enclosure would be, so it's not as much of a concern. I typically use an organic potting soil without anything added to it, no manure, no perlite, no fertilizers, just an organic potting soil mixed with about 1/3 of play sand. And then I also mix in and throw on top some live oak leaf litter. What that does is basically provides a bioactive substrate where if any of the poop does fall down to the bottom, it will get broken down pretty quickly by springtails, by any other cleaning crew like isopods that you might add, and then that waste will be used by the plants. The plant that I typically use is snake plant, Sansevieria. It's a thick, waxy plant that is extremely hardy and thrives in a variety of conditions. And they, in addition to being a fairly attractive plant, they do make very good pathways for the geckos to climb up and down. And also it helps to break up the interior of the enclosure. You may not realize it, but this enclosure is 2 feet deep. So there's a lot of places where these geckos can hide from me or from each other if they choose to do so. The females, you can see the 2 females that are kept in here, they tend to not be so shy. Around the camera, they could just care less. The male, unfortunately, just hates the camera. It's so hard to get video of these guys. I can walk around here and I can stick my hand in there and the male won't bat an eye, but as soon as I turn on the camera, I have the camera shoved in their face and then they hide. So we may or may not see the male. What else I have inside this enclosure? See bamboo pieces. I have some bamboo on my property that I just cut down and dry. Before I had bamboo on my property, I would actually go to Home Depot or the like and buy tiki torches and chop those up to fit, and I just have them wedged in place. So I just measure and cut exactly and put them in there like that. I do plug the ends to make sure that the females do not lay eggs in there. And speaking of egg laying, if you look up there, right here, that green tube is what's known as a floral tube. That's what I use as egg laying sites for the females. Talk more about breeding in a later video, but that's what I use for them to lay their eggs in. It makes it very easy to remove for when they do lay their eggs. I mentioned that this enclosure was 2 feet deep. Let me talk a little bit more about the size of it for what I use. So this is actually part of a dual enclosure, where this enclosure is 24 wide, 24 deep, and 16 inches tall, and it's split into 2 compartments. So each enclosure is 24 inches deep, 12 inches wide, and 16 inches tall. I have in the past kept them in 16 inch by 16 inch by 16 inch enclosures and 16 inch by 16 inch by 19 inch enclosures, and those do work. Touch on the small side. I would definitely not go any smaller than a 16 inch cube for a pair of these animals, for adults anyway. Babies can be raised in something smaller, but I would not go any smaller than that. For feeding and nutrition, if you look over here, I feed them Pangea Complete Gecko Diet with insects, maybe 3 times a week, and then 1 or 2 times a week I will give them live prey such as flightless fruit flies or bean beetles or small crickets. Also for nutrition and supplements, if you look over on the other side, I always have a dish of pure calcium powder. This does not have vitamin D3 in it. That's just pure calcium. I have found over the years that females require this in order to lay successful eggs, successful, fertile, healthy eggs again and again and again. Without that, I've seen so many times with other people's animals where the females stop thriving after a very short period of time. The hatchlings do not thrive, but just by adding a little dish of calcium powder somewhere in the enclosure, that solves that problem. The females will come over and lap it up as they see fit, as much as they need, and that will help with egg production. If you look up here, you can see the misting nozzle. That's from Mist King. I've been using Mist King nozzles and pumps for at least 20 years now. Great company, great products. Because these are arboreal geckos, I do not use a water dish. Instead, I just spray several times a day. In the morning, in the evening, and sometimes at night as well, because the nighttime humidity increase is natural. So that'll spray and cover most of the enclosure with a fine mist with some water droplets. The geckos, when thirsty, will come over and lap that water up. So if you are not using an automatic misting system, I do recommend that you use one. But if you aren't using one, you don't need to. You can just hand spray the enclosure. I recommend doing it twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. A lot of people will ask me, what is the humidity levels that I shoot for? And I can never give a good answer because I don't actually measure humidity. Now, there is a natural humidity cycle that does occur in nature. When the sun is out, it tends to be warmer and water evaporates more and it's drier. During the nighttime, it cools down, water condenses, and it becomes more humid. So that's what I try to replicate. In the morning, in the evening, and at night, humidity is higher, and during the day, it's drier. If you look inside this enclosure, it's midday. It's quite dry in here. Now the soil has a little bit of dampness to it, but not that much. It's not wet, definitely not. You really do want the enclosure to dry out during the day. You cannot have constant wet conditions. That will lead to a host of health problems. So you definitely want to let that dry out during the day, but humid and wet at night is what you're aiming for. Now that doesn't mean that you don't ever mist during the day. It rains in the rainforest even during the day. I do vary my misting time somewhat. I'll just kick on the mister, especially in the summer. I'll let it rain, let it mist in there. There's a misting nozzle for several minutes. There'll be a day when I'll really saturate the cage, let it get real wet in there, real humid, but then let it dry out over the next couple of days. So the main thing to keep in mind is that it should not be constantly wet. They will not do well under constantly wet conditions. Let it dry out regularly. For lighting, I am using a dual T5 high output fixture. Hopefully you can see it there. I'll come down. Very bright, I know, but there are 2 bulbs in there. That's important. One of those bulbs is a UV bulb. I use and recommend Reptile 10.0 T5 high output bulbs. They provide the ultraviolet radiation that these geckos need to thrive. Now this is a species that I have found that you cannot skimp on the UV light. They need it. On a few occasions I've kind of slacked off and forgotten to replace the bulbs, and I would notice the decrease in the health of the animals, and then I would check the bulbs and realize, oh, I forgot to change it. And then as soon as I change the bulb, the health of the animals, their vigor increased dramatically. So I do list UV light for this species as a requirement. Now when I do feed them, I still do use a vitamin D3 supplement. I use Repashy Calcium Plus supplement on all of the feeder insects that I feed them. So the UV light from the Reptile bulb will give them probably most of the D3 that they need, if not all, but that Repashy Calcium Plus has a little bit of D3 in it, and it kind of like tops them off. It just ensures that they are getting enough. Now also in that light fixture is another bulb that is non-UV producing. That is a 6500K T5 high output bulb. What brand does not really matter, just that it is 6500K or Kelvin. Now what that means is that it's a bright white light mimicking the sun. The UV bulbs are great, but they don't produce a ton of bright light. That other bulb, that 6500K bulb that doesn't produce UV, will produce a lot more visible light, which will be very good for the plants to grow as well as for the animals themselves. One aspect of lighting that I haven't touched on yet is photo period, or duration that the light is on. Now I do vary that somewhat throughout the year. So in the summer, I have the lights on for approximately 14 hours a day for about 3 months. In the spring and fall, I'll reduce the photo period down to 12 hours a day lights on, 12 hours a day lights off. And during the winter time, I will have the photo period down to 10 hours a day on and 14 off, so that they do experience some seasonal variation. And my reptile room does tend to get a little bit cooler in the winter, so we'll see a mild reduction in temperature, nothing too major, but there will be definitely a decrease in temperature during that decrease in photo period in the winter. And the whole point of that is to try to give them a chance to rest and lower their metabolisms and just kind of take it easy for a few months. Now, surprisingly, maybe I actually find that during that winter cooling period, they tend to lay a good amount of eggs, and that's actually in the summer when it's hotter and the photo period is longer that they actually reduce their egg production. It does vary by the individual, by the pair, by the breeding group of lizards, so sometimes that can be switched, but that's just in general what I'm seeing. For heating, I pretty much just use the lighting. The lighting is a dual T5 fixture, and that is high output, so it does produce a good amount of heat, and these PVC enclosures that I use really do hold on to the heat and humidity very well. One of the reasons why I like them so much. I used to use halogen puck lights that I would plug into a dimmer switch and then reduce the wattage output of it to produce a hot spot. But now what I do is I just kind of move. I have these bamboo perches quite close to the light source, like we're talking 3 inches away. And I use an infrared temperature gun to read the temperatures in those spots. And what I'm aiming for is a basking spot of around 90 degrees. It can be a little bit more than that, a little bit less than that, but right around 90 degrees Fahrenheit is a basking spot for these guys. That allows them to heat up. And then throughout the cage, that temperature will obviously vary and reduce the further down you go, especially into the shaded areas. So then I would see temperatures often in the 70s Fahrenheit during the day in the cooler portions, up to the lower and mid 80s, all the way up to 90, even up to 100 at the very highest spots of the enclosure where the basking site is. And just that dual T5 fixture does produce that range of temperatures. I was finding that by using an extra basking source like a halogen puck light, it actually got a little bit too warm in there. So I stopped doing that, saves me some electricity, and it's still plenty warm enough for the animals. They don't need to be baking in there. All right, guys, I hope you learned a little bit about these beautiful little geckos. This is not the only time you're going to hear me talk about them. I have decided that I'm going to do a separate video which is going to focus on breeding and care of the hatchlings and juveniles. I realized pretty quickly that if I were to try to throw in all the breeding stuff as well into this video, we'd be here all day. So we're going to save that for another time. So I will go into detail with how I breed this species and how I raise the youngsters, little tips and tricks I've learned for egg incubation and for raising the hatchlings so that they are healthy. This isn't the first time that I've put my information out there for taking care of Lygodactylus williamsi. I've written and published a very detailed care sheet, which is on my website. I will link in the description below, just livingartbyfrankpayne.com. I've also published that article or a similar article in Reptiles magazine. I'll link to their website as well. And if you want to get a hard copy of that, you can get that as well. But they also have it for free online, so definitely check that out. Thank you very much for joining me. Like always, please do like this video, hit that little subscribe button down below, and make sure you come back next time to learn all about how we breed this beautiful gecko, and continue to stick with me as I will continue to put out video care sheets like this one. I'll do eventually an entire facility tour, tell you about all my different projects that I'm working with, Hopefully we'll also include other people in this. I'll be able to go to other people's facilities, to zoos, and check out what they're doing there. So again, guys, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day.